Hi there, this is Teri from Stamping Magic. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have 3 projects to share with you. Now these all use the Inspiring Iris stamp set. This is a lovely stamp set with 3 different types of flowers as well as sentiments and supporting images. This is a 2-step stamp set, so you have outline images and then you have other stamps that you can use to colour in your image. This is what the images look like once they've been stamped. You can see the black outline, and then I've filled in the colour using the additional stamps in the set. Now for today's cards, I'm not using a 2-step stamping method at all. I'm just going to use the fill-in stamps to create my images. So you don't have to use the outline image if you don't want to. Let's get started. These are all the measurements you need for card number 1. So if you're interested in reproducing this one, take a screenshot and you can refer to it later. This is the first card I'm going to create for you. I used crushed curry for the flowers for this one. Now the sentiment was in Memento Tuxedo Black. I'm using Seaside Spray for the flowers for the new card and Pear Pizzazz for the leaves. I'm using my Stamparatus to stamp the sentiment because I know I'm going to want to overstamp it. This comes from the Magnolia Bloom stamp set. I'm placing the case underneath the plate to keep it straight and to help with inking up the stamp. I'm stamping on scrap Whisper White card because this will be die cut later on. By overstamping or stamping a second time, you get a much more intense black image. I'm using one of the oval stitched shapes dies to cut this out, and this is the second size up. The Seaside Spray scalloped oval mat was cut out using one of the layering ovals framelets, and this is the 3rd size up. And then I used one of the dies from the Stitched Labels framelit die set to create the black mat. Because this is a photopolymer stamp set, I'm going to be stamping on my piercing mat. I want to stamp the flowers in a curve across the bottom half of the card mat, and I'm using my Seaside Spray ink and just the flower head stamp to start off with. Then once I'm happy with the coverage, I'm going to switch to Pear Pizzazz ink and stamp the stems and the leaves. And then if I've got any gaps at the end, I can always go back and fill them in. I'm going to emboss this mat using the Settle embossing folder. This can then be added to the Seaside Spray mat. And then it can be added to the basic black card base. I added dimensionals to the back of the sentiment panel, and this can now be positioned onto the front of the card. The white sentiment mat was glued flat to the Seaside Spray oval, and then I used dimensionals to add this to the black mat. And that's it, my first card is complete. And here is the original one again. Okay, here are all the measurements you need for the second card that I'm going to do. So again, take a screenshot if you want to reproduce it. And this is the second card. Now the colours I've used are Real Red and Old Olive. The background paper is from the Regal's 6-inch paper stack. For my new card, I'm going to use Pumpkin Pie with Old Olive. I'm going to stamp the sentiment just on a little scrap of Whisper White card, and I'm using the Old Olive ink. And then I'm going to punch this out using the classic label punch. Now I'm punching the left hand side first of all, and then I'm going to reinsert the little label and punch the right hand side. So you can adjust the size of this little punch quite easily. I'm using Old Olive ink again to stamp 3 stems across my large Whisper White mat. And then I'm using the Pumpkin Pie for the flower heads. These will be cut out using one of the rectangle stitched framelit dies, and this is one size up from the smallest. I've layered my flowers onto Old Olive mats, and I've added dimensionals to the back of those and also the back of the sentiment piece. I've also layered my Pumpkin Pie Designer Series paper onto my Pumpkin Pie mat. And again, this paper is from the Regal's 6-inch stack. Starting with the centre one, I'm going to place all 3 panels onto this mat. The middle panel will be raised higher than the ones on either side. And then I'll be able to position my sentiment underneath that centre panel. I can then position this panel onto the front of my card base, and this time I have an Old Olive landscape card base. Finally, I can add the mat to the inside of my card, and I've just decorated this with a strip of Pumpkin Pie and a narrow strip of the matching Designer Series paper. And that's card number 2 finished. Here are all the measurements you need for the final card, so don't forget to take a screenshot if you're interested in reproducing it. This is my third card. I used Rococo Rose Designer Series paper from the 6-inch in colour stack, and also for the sentiment. The flowers were actually stamped in Blushing Bride with soft sea foam leaves. The sentiment I'm using comes from the Woven Heirlooms stamp set, and I'm going to stamp it this time in terracotta tile ink. This time I'm going to use Grapefruit Grove for the flowers and Soft Sea Foam for the leaves. Now you need to stamp 4 flowers. 3 of them are going to have leaves attached, and the last one will just be an isolated flower. all of these need to be cut out by hand. The single flower is the only one that needs dimensionals on the reverse. Now I cut out my frame, which is in Sahara sand, using one of the heirloom frames dies, and then I'm going to emboss it using the Heirloom Frames 3D embossing folder. Now when you insert this into the folder, you just want to take your time and line it up so you've got an even border all the way round that embossed image you can see on your folder. Okay, now before I actually send this through my die cutting machine, I do spritz it with water. And this is what it looks like when it's finished. Now for this frame, you choose which side you want to use. Both sides of the frame look really nice. And once you've decided, you want to add mini dimensionals, if you have them, to the reverse. You can then remove the backings and position your frame over your stamped sentiment panel. All the flowers can then be glued onto the frame. And then I'm going to add a large basic pearl to each of the flower centres. I've used terracotta tile designer series paper this time, and I've added it to a terracotta tile cardstock mat. So the sentiment panel can now be added to the centre of this mat. This whole section can then be added to the front of a Sahara sand card base. And this time I decided to stamp my inside mat, so I just did it with the same colours in the same way as I did my flowers that I added to the frame. And here is my finished final card. And here are all 6 cards all together. So I created 2 of each of the 3 different flowers in the Inspiring Iris stamp set. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Bye for now.